I read 12 books in January and I want to talk about them, so let's do it. The first book that I read in January was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Songu Mandana. I love this book. It really surprised me how much I liked it. I know that everyone was talking about this book in a way that would make me think that I was gonna like it. I totally did it. It really blew me away. This book has a slightly complicated premise. So essentially there's a world where witches exist, but people can't know about it. And so they meet every so often to just hang out, but they can't really associate with each other all that much because it's just not safe for people to possibly find out that they're witches. There are a bunch of teachers and stuff that live in this home for orphans, and these 3 girls are brought to live in this home, and the 3 of them are witches, and so typically they wouldn't be able to live together. But the people that are in charge of the home are kind of okay, we need someone to teach these girls magic because they're learning magic. And so the main character is kind of recruited to come and work at this home and teach these girls magic because she is a witch and she does online, say TikTok witchy stuff, and is pretending to be a witch on TikTok, but she's actually a witch, and they figure that she might be a witch based on her TikTok or whatever. And so they recruit her, and it's very found family vibes. It's pretty whimsical. It's kind of like a cozy fantasy vibe is maybe how I've seen it described by people, and it's just got so much heart, and it's got romance, and I loved it so much. I would highly recommend this book if you've heard of it. I put it on my holds on Libby in October and it was in such high demand that I ended up getting the book in January. So it was supposed to be a thematic October read for me, but instead ended up just being a fun little treat in January. And I loved the romance. There's a grumpy sunshine type experience here, and throughout other books that I've read this month or so, I've found out that I'm not a huge fan of grumpy sunshine all the time. But I really liked it in this book. It was done really well. I loved the romance. I loved the conflict. I loved the relationship that the main character has with the girls and the other people in the home. It just was such a well-rounded good book. And I found out recently that it is a series. And I don't know if it's interconnected standalones or what, but there's another book, and that I am going to be reading that whenever I can, if I can. The next book that I read in January was the sequel to The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. And so I only own this first book, and I read the second and third books from the library, so I don't have them anymore. But I really loved this book when I read it at the end of December. I actually just sat down and couldn't stop reading it and just flew through it. This book is a 5-star to me. It's very special. I finished this book and immediately was I need more. And so I knew that I had to figure out a way to read the other books, and my library didn't have them on audio. And so I was you know what, I'm gonna go into the library and get the physical copy and read them. And so the second book is called The Way I Am Now, and the third book is called The Way We Met. This isn't quite sequential of in which I read them, just because I can talk about this series all at once. But the third book is a little tiny itty bitty novella, and I didn't know that, and I had a hard time tracking it down, which was so sad, but I was able to read it and I was happy about it. So 5 stars from this book, 5 stars from the second book, and then the third little novella was oh, I don't know, I guess it's a 4-star. Did this need to happen? No. But did I like it? Yes. And I think that for most people, I think that just reading this book is enough, and you don't really need to read the second book. But I do think the second book is good, and I think that it has value, and I think that it adds to this story and to this series. And so I'll explain a little bit about what this story is about because obviously I can't explain what the other books are about because that would be spoilers. But essentially, this book is about a girl who is 14 and gets sexually assaulted by her best friend's brother. And the way that she tries to deal with that, essentially with her friendships and her familial relationships and her relationship with herself and romantic relationships, and just trying to deal with and make sense of this thing that happened to her. And it's very much about like being a teenager and the things that come with that, and it's about like trauma and unresolved emotions and how it manifests over the course of many years. It starts with her in freshman year of high school, and this book goes through her senior year of high school. It's amazing, in my opinion. I felt that there was a lot of value for me reading this book 5 years out of being in high school and looking back on who I was as a teenager and the things that I went through, not necessarily relating to the thing that happened in the book, but just this book tackles trauma in such a well-informed way, and I really appreciated that about it. And I think that it's a very personal story from the author, which is why it was so well written, and I loved this book so much that I immediately had to read the second book, and then I just didn't want to stop reading about these characters. It had this very unique sense in reading this book. I just need to make sure that everything is okay for this character. From page 1, when this terrible thing happens to her in this book, I'm just like, oh, I just want her to feel better, which is such a unique reading experience. But these books are very challenging to get through. This one, I would argue more so possibly than like the second book, because this is just the meat of the trauma that she is dealing with, and then in the second book she goes to college and it's just a little bit more removed from the situation. But in this book it is just like the day-to-day of like the terrible things that happen when we experience huge traumas, and it's very uncomfortable to read. This series, these books are incredible. If you're interested in them, I cannot recommend them enough. Next, I listened to a really interesting book called Unmask Alice by Rick Emerson. I loved this book. I loved like the end product of it. Reading this book was like so infuriating. Like my reading experience during this book was just like, oh, this makes me so mad. Oh, this makes me so mad. And this is a nonfiction. And so it is essentially about these books that were released in like the 80s and 90s, maybe? I can't specifically remember. But Go Ask Alice. These types of books, there were a bunch of them. I read Go Ask Alice in like late high school, and it's essentially about these books and how they came to be and like how they were written and like what are they even about? Are they real? And so Go Ask Alice, I think, is the most popular one, possibly. It is about a girl who, it's supposedly her journal entries, and she gets addicted to LSD and then, like, eventually succumbs to the effects of it and dies. Like, that's how this book is marketed, so, like, people just kind of know that that's like what this book is about. But there's just a lot more to the story of these books and the person who kind of like compiled them together and the realism of them, and then also it goes into like the context in which these books came out. Go Ask Alice was released like right in the middle of a lot of historical events regarding LSD and its legalization or lack thereof, and just societal impacts in the United States of LSD. And so its publication like really fits into that context, and it's really interesting to understand and to parse out like why this book came out and why it appears the way that it does. This book, Unmask Alice, is so infuriating because I'm a person who reads a lot of books. I read 110 plus books last year. You have a sense of like trust in an author when you read a work of nonfiction or something adjacent to nonfiction, that what you're reading is like true. It's really important to read things with an open mind and with nuance, and to take into account the culture and the context in which books were released to understand the points that they were making, because human beings are so flawed. I am getting my master's degree in psychology right now, and oh, I know that so well. Like, people, our thoughts are constantly shaping our reality, and our reality is not objective. It's very much up to interpretation and shaped by our past experiences. And authors are the same way, but sometimes I forget that. And this book did a really good job of reminding me to be skeptical of the things that I read, or to not take things at surface level, and to examine the deeper context behind books. And I really appreciated that of it. Next, I read Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I had this book on hold for a while as well. I ended up loving Atmosphere. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Was like one of the first books I read when I got back into reading in 2023, and it reminded me why I love books. And since I've read Daisy Jones and the Six and One True Loves, and those were both okay, they were good, but not my favorites. But Atmosphere was, again, like, really good. Everyone that has read Atmosphere has been like, oh, it's so good. Like, I didn't even know what it was about. Honestly, the fact that Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote it was kind of enough for me to be like, okay, yeah, one day I'll read it. But I just heard that people loved it, and it was on so many people's favorite book of 2025 list, and so I just had to get into it. I would argue it's good to go into this book not knowing a ton, which is why I give really brief descriptions of the books that I talk about. But essentially there's like space vibes, and also this book takes place in like the 70s or 60s or something, and it's about a woman who wants to go up into space and wants to train to become an astronaut, and she's training with other astronauts, and she's kind of competing against them to decide who is going to go into space and like who's going to get a mission and all of that. And there's a love story, and it's about her family, and it's about just her relationships with the world and just who she is as a character, really. This is a really interesting character study to me, and those are 10 times out of 10 my favorite books are really interesting character studies. And so of course I loved this, and the space backdrop was so interesting, and the historical backdrop was also so interesting. I absolutely loved this book, and again, it was so heartfelt. It had such an incredible plot. It kind of goes back and forth between multiple timelines, and I kind of wish that it didn't. I think that's like maybe my only thing that I didn't like about this book, is I would have preferred that it not go into multiple timelines. I think that I kind of got a lot from this book, and again, like, it made me feel all of the different emotions. It made me mad at times, like the things that were happening to the character, sad and happy, and like just the whole breadth, and like embarrassment. Like, I love when a book can just make me feel a wide variety of emotions so viscerally, and this book did that. It is really good, and I would highly recommend it. I liked the writing, I liked the plot arc. I feel like these characters were really well developed. There were kind of a lot of characters-ish. Like, I kind of like smaller cast stories so that we can really go deep into characters, but I think Taylor Jenkins Reid does a good job making people and just describing them, and so I really liked Atmosphere. Next, I read The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. And so I didn't know what I was getting into when I grabbed this book, when I randomly selected it off of my just humongous list of all of the books that I want to read at any given time, because this is a series of short stories and then a novella at the end. At least that's what my library had. And so at the beginning, I'm listening to all these short stories, and I'm like, what? And so these short stories are not connected thematically or by plot or anything at all, other than that they're all about, like, women. A lot of them are about being a woman of color and society and how people are kind of classified, and, like, struggles through those classifications, boxes that people are put into, race, class, socioeconomic status, all those things are just kind of the themes in these books. And then The Office of Historical Corrections is more of a novella, and it is just essentially about this very smart, educated Black woman who works in a job where she essentially like goes around town and corrects things that are historically inaccurate and kind of goes from there. So my experience with this book and all of the stories within them are that the novella was just like not nearly the most well done story, in my opinion. I consistently find myself still thinking about a lot of the short stories. Multiple of them really stuck out to me as really good. But the novella was just kind of like, okay, like it was fine. And I guess some of the short stories felt like that as well, but some of them were really good. And so I would never write off this book for this reason. I think that it was so valuable. Like, would I recommend it for just that reason? That it was really valuable as a non-person of color to just read about those experiences? Absolutely. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe it's done better in other ways, and maybe it just didn't like mesh well with my personal like interest and what I expected and stuff. It felt I don't know. I just didn't like the story, really, but I really liked some of the short stories, and I do think that, like, the book in the work of art in its entirety is absolutely worth your time for that reason. So I would recommend it, and I did like it. I did enjoy reading all of these stories. The next book that I read in January was such a different book than all of the rest of them, but For a Divergent Collection by Veronica Roth, and I read the Divergent series in 2024, I think, and it was kind of a reread because I read the first Divergent book in middle school, and then I got 100 pages into Insurgent and never finished it, and I'd probably watched the Divergent movie but not Insurgent, and I definitely haven't watched Allegiant, and I knew how Allegiant ended, but once I finished this series, I went to the thrift store and picked this up. I was like, oh cool, like another story in this series, in this world, like that's so cool. To make a long story short, I hated this, but first, like, the Divergent series, I've heard a lot of insanely negative things about it. I know that it's not a perfect dystopian, it's not a perfect work of literature, but I really enjoyed Insurgent in particular. I really liked the first book. I thought it was solid. I thought that Insurgent really added to the story in a meaningful way, and then Allegiant just essentially took everything that Insurgent did and flipped it inside out. I absolutely hated Allegiant, and it kind of taints the way that I view the trilogy. But I was like, learn more about For sounds good. This book is essentially just a couple of events that happen in the first book from For's perspective. And so you really get little to no additional insight into anything about the world, the characters, or anything from reading this book, in particular with the later ones. And I just think this is completely useless. The writing in this became really insufferable towards the end. Like, I think that in the span of 4 pages, he called her small like 6 or 7 times. And then I might just have to read a little part for you. That just really made me think that this was the worst writing I've ever read. Like, so bad. And I don't know if the Divergent books were like that and I just didn't notice, but oh boy. Okay, I found it. So this is when For and Tris are kind of like getting together, like deciding they like each other for the first time, and she's like, how could you not like me? I'm not even that pretty. And For goes, fine, you're not pretty, so I like how you look. Like, that's just an absolutely insane thing to write, in my opinion. This was bad. There was a deterioration that happened towards the end. I was kind of like fine with it for most of it until I was like, oh, this is adding nothing and it's poorly written, and I just am so glad that it ended when it did because I wouldn't have been able to finish it otherwise. 2-star, I think. 3-star max. Next, I've read Challenger Deep by Neil Shusterman, and I have had this book on my TBR for years. Like, this was like a 2016 booktube recommendation. I used to want to read a lot of YA mental health books, like all of them, and this was one of those that I just never got to until significantly later. And I'm glad that I finally read it because I really enjoyed it. So this book is essentially about like a 15-year-old boy who kind of starts becoming untethered from reality and like maybe hearing voices kind of and getting paranoid, and he's just not quite sure like what's real and what's not, and kind of ends up having a psychotic break and ends up in a psych hospital towards like the middle part of this book. It's about his journey with his mental illness and figuring out what's going on with him and his family members and his friendships and his schoolwork and how all those things are impacted and how he has to kind of come to terms with this new thing about him. It really goes into labels and treatment and the issues with the psychiatric health system, antipsychotics, and how having a mental illness can affect familial relationships with siblings, with parents, with friends, and just the things that you loved to do once and now kind of like can't anymore. It is extremely challenging to be in, and I listened to this as an audiobook, and to kind of be inside someone's thought spiral that is manufactured is really overwhelming and it's really challenging. But as the book progresses, I think that it is actually a really valuable experience, and I am not somebody who has ever experienced symptoms like these, and so it's very eye-opening to understand that people live with those thoughts in their head constantly and don't get to like pause the book and take a breather, you know? And it was really good, and I think that it is an overwhelming story that has trigger warnings associated with it for sure, but I think that it makes a statement that is really impactful and cares for the reader in a meaningful way, which I think just directly contrasts it from the next book that I would like to talk about. Well, I wouldn't like to talk about, but I'm going to. Is Beautiful by Amy Reed, and I don't think very many people have read this book, and so this is me telling you don't, because this book I read in 7th or 8th grade, and there was a plot point in this book that just made me angry, and so I rated it 1 star, and I don't anymore think that it's like productive to rate books 1 star. I have a very specific rating system, and I just don't like to rate books that low. Really, the lowest I will rate a book is 2 star if I think it was absolutely abysmal, but most books don't get below a 3 star from me if I finish them. If I am really gonna hate a book that much, I try to not finish them. I wanted to reread this book because I still had it on my shelves, and I was like, well, let me give it another chance and just like see. And as it turns out, this book is as bad as I thought it was as a teen. And the other book that I had that experience with was Where She Went by Gail Forman, which is the second book to the If I Stay duology, and I just didn't like how that book started, so I gave it a 1 star. And then a couple years ago, I reread the duology and was like, nah, like, Where She Went isn't my favorite book ever, but it's more of a 3 star. And so I did figure that I would have an experience like that rereading Beautiful, but I did not. This book feels exploitative, and so it's about a girl who moves to a new city and is kind of trying to shake off this old persona of this like goody two-shoes, smart, nerdy girl, whatever thing, and she wants to have friends and be popular and that type of thing. So a girl kind of like takes her under her wing at her new school and is like, I'm going to introduce you to guys and partying and hard drugs. These girls are like 13, maybe. They're in 7th grade and having sex and trying to like sell their bodies to prostitution and planning to run away and stealing from their moms and coming up with these schemes to like steal from random strangers on the street and doing LSD and cocaine and anything they can get their hands on, drinking a ton of alcohol. And you get into this book and it feels very like indulgent. It feels very like, ooh, let's just see how much can go wrong here. And with an audience of people that are freshly teenagers, I just don't think it's responsible to have written a book like this with seemingly no point, that very much just like jumps off the deep end very quickly and never comes back. I don't think this book should have ever been written. I don't think anyone should ever recommend it, and so I don't. I am thinking of getting rid of it, but the thing is, I don't want to like give it to somebody else. So, and I think that Haley in 7th or 8th grade that was very angry about the plot point that happened in this book was completely valid in it. I did not give it a 1 star with this reread, but I did give it 2 stars. Not at this point in the month, I didn't really have a list of books lined up that I was wanting to read, and so I was like, all right, I can read anything, like, let's just see. And so I went on my Libby app and I searched dystopian and found a dystopian book called The Resistors by Jish Yen, and this book is also not very popular and I had never heard of it, but I was like, sure. So it's essentially like dystopian, AI focused, but baseball as a backdrop. It takes place in like postmodern America, where houses and jobs and everything have been taken over by AI, and humans kind of live alongside robots, and they're kind of split into multiple groups of people, that like the people who their jobs were taken over by the AI and the people who like aren't, and so these are like very distinct classes at this time. The book kind of just goes into the politics and reality of the world that it's describing, but then it kind of goes into this couple whose daughter like really likes baseball and is actually maybe like a really good pitcher in baseball, and it's possible that for entertainment, society is going to like bring back baseball and bring it into the Olympics, and so she kind of like goes to college to play baseball sort of, but then all of these politics kind of just are influential on the story here. It is a really interesting story, but like the concepts were the most interesting part. Just consideration of how might the world be in say 30 years when we've been living with AI and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, like what might life look like? And I think that was the strong point of this book. The weak point was like the plot and things making sense, because things didn't make a ton of sense in this book, like the plot points, and there was a good plot from beginning to end, but there was just so much like random stuff added in that I was just kind of like, what's going on consistently? And the characters were kind of developed, but also they kind of weren't. And so I think that it was a really good book for the concepts that it was talked about, and it was very exploratory in the dystopian genre, which I enjoyed. I had never read a book just like this, and so I appreciated that, and if you are looking for a book like that, you might appreciate it too. But at the end of the day, I just don't think it was fleshed out in the way that it meant to. I feel like it needed some more time. Solid, but I think it could have maybe had some improvement. And then I also didn't know what book I was going to read next, and so I think that I started searching sports romance in Libby, and so I found Intercepted by Alexa Martin, and this is a football sports romance, and I was obsessed with it, not gonna lie. Like at the very beginning I was like, this book has problems, and then I was like, no, it's actually really good. And I don't know if I think this book is really good, but personally for me it was. And so it's a football romance about the Broncos, essentially the Denver Broncos, and I think that it's not a very popular book, but I think it's just kind of regional for like the area that I live, because like I love the Broncos, and for copyright reasons I don't think they're allowed to be called the Broncos, so they were the Denver Mustangs. And this girl is essentially dating this guy who's on this team, and he's like a star wide receiver, and then they get a new quarterback, and she is kind of like in with the wives of the football group, but she's not married because her boyfriend of long term will not propose to her, and eventually finds out that he's cheating on her and whatever. And she's also got history with this quarterback that comes to play for this new football team, and so there's just like drama there, and it's just a cutesy little romance, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. It uses hashtags frequently within the book, which was so funny, honestly. Like kind of like I think a lot of people would read that and be like, oh, but I was just kind of like, oh, it's kind of funny, like I'm okay with it, I'll allow it. And So it's not the most perfectly written. It has a solid plot. I liked the characters. Like, I just really enjoyed this, and there is a series with lots of different characters in it, and you bet that I'm gonna go back and continue reading because I love a sports romance. One thing about me, sports is the background, but I've never read a football romance, and I love football, so sold. It was good. I liked it. 4 stars. Didn't change my life, obviously, but I just had a great time while reading it, and that's what I want out of a romance. Lastly, I read Beartown by Frederick Bachman, and arguably this is the standout book of the month. I was saving this book and this series for a rainy day, not gonna lie. I knew that when I read this book it was gonna be 5 stars. Like, I knew that for a fact. I love Frederick Bachman. A Man Called Uva is like easily top 5 my favorite books of all time. I really liked Anxious People. I've read one of his novellas and it's really good, and I knew I was gonna love Beartown. And so Beartown, at its most simplest, is a book about lots of characters that live in this town called Beartown, and this town, kind of at the center of it, is a hockey team of like kids in high school, honestly, and there's like the whole management system of this team, and all of the politics around the town center around it, and hockey is very important to this team for reasons that you find out very quickly. It really just runs the town. Some of the main characters are a family in the center of this hockey team because the dad is the GM, the wife like ended up moving to Beartown and she is a lawyer, and then their 2 kids, their youngest son plays on a lower level hockey team, and then the daughter's like not really into hockey or the team. This book was really, really good, and I figured that when I read it, I've just heard that these books can be repetitive in the series, and so I figured I was going to wait like a year or 6 months in between these books to read them. But I finished this book and I was like, I immediately need more. I don't know if I can wait. I am obsessed with like all of these characters that are in this book, and I just felt, again, a wide range of emotions while reading this book, and it is the topics that it ends up tackling. Like, this book probably has every trigger warning under the sun. There's a lot of like death that is described. There are a lot of bad things that happen in this book, and they are still handled with so much nuance and care that I just don't often see in books. Like, usually there are like just one-sided takes, which I think are important, nuanced takes, but like this book takes really challenging concepts and just goes at them from lots of different angles and doesn't necessarily tell you what to think about them. It just kind of lets you experience the story and just kind of leads you down a journey. And I loved this. I will be reading the second book when I get a chance, when I am done with like my little physical TBR that I have going on. But I really loved this, and I think that if you're into characters, if you're into Frederick Bachman, if you're into like a good plot, if you're into sports, if you're into fiction, I would recommend this book. It is so good. It's crazy to me that translated fiction can be like this, because it is, I just love the writing so much, but like I'm not reading it in the original language, and so it is crazy that a book can be this meaningful. And I think that I'm going to continue to think about this story for like the rest of my life, and I'm just kind of still chewing on it a little bit and trying to figure out like if this goes into my favorite books of all time list or not. So those are the 12 books that I read in January. I feel like this was a very well-rounded reading month with some like new faves, some insanely good books, and some books that were just like fine, and also some books that like really sucked. And so we got like the whole standard distribution in this wrap up, and I'm so excited to continue reading the Beartown series and to see what I read in February, because I'm going to focus more on romance and just lean into love, and I am so excited for that. So I'll see you when I wrap up my books that I read in February. Bye!